morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are around the world, and welcome back to Into the Deck. I am Manuel, your host here on the show. This time we talk about Pioneer Lotus Breach, and I have the pleasure to have here in the studio Julian Nazarenus. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure, absolutely, and it's about time, because the last time we recorded something together here in the studio was during the Hogak summer.
Yeah, it's been quite a while.
Yeah, quite a while, and I mean, it was like last summer in the end, but it feels like ages ago.
Yeah.
So many things changed. I mean, the meta crazy things, and we have Pioneer, a new format.
Yeah.
Back then, didn't even exist.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about Lotus Breach. And first things first, let's have a look at your list. All right, the core of this deck is set in stone. There are only a few flexi slots, and this is actually what I'd like to talk about, because there are some lists that play Thassa's Oracle, some other lists that play Expansion Explosion. So can you guide me through your personal preference?
Well, yeah, I'm playing Thassa's Oracle here as the win condition. I like that it's a good card in the early game, just as a blocker against the aggro decks. It filters your draws, and Explosion is often a dead card in the early game. It's just there for finishing. And I like having a body to block, because the aggro decks are some of the worst matchups. So I like Oracle.
Okay, perfect sense. Any other flexi slots you would like to talk about?
Well, I'm playing 2 Blink of an Eye. Some lists play only one, some play none at all. I like it as a catch-all answer in the main deck, because some people play, for example, Narset, Part of Whales in their blue-white control decks, and this is a card that is hard to beat sometimes. So I just like having an answer to problematic cards. Also, it just buys time. It can bounce an expensive creature like a 5-drop or whatever. And it's just a flexible card, and also draws a card if you kick it.
You can also bounce your own creatures if you need them for some reason. Maybe bouncing your one-off or Thassa's Oracle to look at more cards or something like that.
Yeah, that's a fringe play, but it can happen, definitely.
So that's a bonus as well. All right, anything else you would like to add about the list?
I think the rest of the list is pretty stock.
All right, excellent. So let's just go for the tips and tricks then. So if I were to play this deck, what are the important things I should be aware of?
Well, the most important thing, obviously, is to assemble the Thespian Stage Lotus Field combo. So you never want to keep a hand that has neither of those or a way to find them. If you have like 2 grazers and a bunch of lands, in other decks and ramp decks that might be good, but in this deck we are looking for specific cards. So you always want to have a way to get to Breach and Field at as early as turn 3 or 2, because without the combo the deck does not function at all.
All right. Since you were mentioning the opening hand, that's really important. But you need to know what to keep, what you're looking for. So what's the ideal hand you would like to have when you begin a game?
The ideal hand is a green untapped source of mana, like Botanical Sanctum, an Arboreal Grazer, because it speeds things up, a Lotus Field and a stage, and some way of going off, like Power Over the Pages. Of course, the best one, because it draws 3 cards and you can pretty easily go off. Or just Fey of Wishes and Hidden Strings. You generate a bunch of mana and then you find your win condition out of the sideboard with the Fey of Wishes.
Yeah, that's a pretty important part of the deck, actually, Fey of Wishes.
Yeah, it is. You don't need it to win the game, but it makes things much easier, because you can go off with Power Over the Pages and Underworld Breach. You can do that and get to Thassa's Oracle and mill your entire deck, but it's somewhat complicated. The easier way is just to pick up Tome Scour from your sideboard, which then mills you for 5, which enables the escape mechanic from Underworld Breach again. Then you Hidden Strings, untap 2 Lotus Fields, get 4 mana, which enables you to Tome Scour again, and then you just take turns playing those cards, and it's much easier to mill your deck this way.
Yeah, you set the loop.
Yeah.
And then you just go for milling entirely your deck and...
exactly, and then you play the Oracle.
Yeah. All right. So there are many, how can I say, there are many clean wins. Sometimes you have really 2 Lotus Fields on the battlefield, sometimes you have only 1. you could win with a hand that you have already, like Fair Wishes and Hidden Strings in your hand, plus 2 cards that you can discard. But sometimes things are a little bit different. So do you have a preference when you set up your game and you play the first turns? Do you have like a specific plan in mind, or you just adapt to the matchup and see what is the best plan for that particular matchup?
It's not really about the matchup, it's more like what cards you draw. Because as I said, sometimes it's totally enough to just pour over the pages and go through your deck. In the end, it's always easier to go for the Tome Scour, because while you're digging through a deck, you will assemble enough mana to just fave for the Tome Scour. But in reality, as soon as you have assembled Underworld Breach and pour over the pages, you can win how you wish. From that point on, you're like 99% to win the game anyway.
All right. Post-cyber games, I guess they get a little bit more difficult.
Yes,
because
definitely.
the hate is there. I mean, so, well, you have specific answers to specific threats, because, of course, you run cards that deal with artifacts, so you can take care of Dumping Sphere, for instance, that kind of thing. When you play game 3, do you want to have these answers, straight in your starting hand straight away, or how do you want to play those games post-sideboard?
That depends on the matchup. In the very fast matchups, like for example mono red aggro, you want to board in all the hate cards because you don't have time to fave for a sideboard card that costs a lot of mana, and sometimes you just don't have the time for it. So you rather just want to draw the cards naturally. You have some filtering, some search options, so it shouldn't be too hard. Against the slow decks like Control, you typically can leave one of them in the sideboard, because eventually you will get to play a Fair Wishes and grab it. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about Hidden Strings. I mean, this is a card that you normally use to untap your Lotus fields.
Yes.
So that you can accumulate mana, and et cetera, et cetera. But are there instances in which it has other uses?
Well, there are exceptions. They are very rare, but they exist sometimes. For example, you're playing a bunch of creatures, not a lot, but for example, you can play the Fair Wishes as a creature. You have Zeta Wayfinder, and if the opponent has Narset, Part of Wales, as I said earlier, problematic card, and they also have a blocker, you can tap them down and swing a Narset and remove her. That doesn't come up often, but it's a possibility.
So the possibility of cipher one of your creatures and then use it to attack to have the spell being put on the stack again, a copy, is something that every now and then can actually be used.
I personally never use that,
Okay.
but it can come up, definitely.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the tricks that you can do with certain cards of this deck. I mean, pretty important interactions that you have to be aware of.
So Thespian Stage is a pretty interesting card in the deck. It does a lot of things. For example, you can, in response to a Field of Ruin activation, you can copy a basic land and protect the stage this way if you not yet have a Lotus field. Another thing is you can trick your opponent into spending their mana in copying the Lotus field, and then they want to kill the stage in response. And then you can, if you have mana left, cycle the Vizier of Tumbling Sands, untap the Thespian Stage, and copy again. So that's a nice little trick. Also in long games, like against blue-white control, you sometimes can copy the castles, like white castle or blue castle. Both things I copied already. I actually won one game where I had a lot of Lotus fields. I had like 10 lands or whatever on the battlefield. It was a really grindy game. And then I copied multiple white castles and made more tokens than my opponent did.
Oh, that's a neat one. That's a nice way actually to win the game.
So Thespian Stage is a pretty good card in this deck, and it does a lot of things.
Okay, important to exploit actually the value of Thespian Stage as much as possible.
Yeah. Also another thing, if you don't have Thespian Stage, but you have Lotus Field, you can play the Vizier of Tumbling Sands. Just play it, do not cycle it. And then it acts as a second Lotus Field because it untaps the field. So it's the same amount of mana you gain, like with Hidden Strings. You just untap Vizier and Lotus Field, and you can go off this way as well.
All right. Okay. Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about common mistakes that players could make whilst playing this deck and you actually should avoid.
Yeah. So first mistake: never play your Thespian stage as one of the first lands, because obviously you have to sacrifice them later for the Lotus field. That's a thing that some players definitely do wrong. Then, especially in post-board games, when you expect Damping Sphere, do not just play your Lotus field as soon as possible if you don't have other lands, because if they drop the Sphere, you suddenly don't have mana to use your strategic plannings or whatever to find more cards. So in the slower matchups, I often wait and just play normal lands and dig for my combo and my answers for the hate cards.
Anything else you would like to add? Any other common mistakes?
Yeah, you definitely want to count your mana beforehand before you combo off, because it's pretty awkward to start playing your cards and then you realize you're missing one mana. And one thing that is, because a lot of opponents, if they see the deck the first time, it's hard for them to understand how much mana you generate, because you're doing a lot of untapping and tapping. So you can always keep in mind that Vizier and Pour Over the Pages always generate 1 mana with 2 Lotus fields on the field, and Hidden Strings always generates 4 mana. So it's pretty easy to just count it up, tell your opponent this makes 1, this makes 1, this makes 4, and then you can do the math, and it's easier for them to understand what you're doing.
Okay, so you have to create a sort of shortcut.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also good for you actually for, let's say, saving some energy in terms of mind energy.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty annoying to always tap your cards, untap them. It's much easier to just say, here, I generate 1, I generate 1, I generate 4.
Okay.
It's much easier.
But you need, of course, to prove that you know what you're doing.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. So if they want you to break down each single step, you have to be able to do it, of course.
Yes.
Because that's important. So really important actually to understand how the whole loop is set up and how many cards you need in the graveyard as well to pay the escape cost as well. By the way, do you have a sort of method to keep track of how many cards you have in the graveyard? Because that's pretty important.
Not really.
You just know.
I don't know. I just look at the graveyard every now and then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't use a die or something like that?
No.
You just...
I don't think it's that important, honestly, because if you have Underworld Breach and, for example, Pour Over the Pages, and you have a bunch of cards in the graveyard, you see it's more than like 3 or 4, then usually it's enough to go off.
Yeah.
So I don't count the cards beforehand.
Okay. But you need to have at least 3 or 4,
Yeah,
I guess.
of course. At least 3, because you want to...
That's a number that, let's say, already says, okay, you've got enough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk again about sideboard games, because another answer that your opponents could side against you is Unmoored Ego.
Yes.
So they could maybe exile all your Fae of Wishes or maybe all your Hidden Strings. So what is your plan to, let's say, be able to win the game despite this fact?
So I almost always bring in Ugin the Spirit Dragon and Jace, I forgot its name actually.
Wielder of Mysteries.
Yeah, that's the name.
Yeah.
I bring in those guys. I also, of course, Unmoored Ego decks are blue, so I bring in Mystical Disputes, so I can just counter it maybe. But yeah, I definitely want more win conditions in the main deck after game 1, because the exile effects are common nowadays. Even mono black plays like Lost Legacy. So you almost always want to bring more win conditions in.
All right, since we were talking about sideboard games, the mirror match is also a possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like the most popular deck, but it's definitely there in the meta game. So is it like each one developing their own plan, or are you actually interacting with one another?
Well, there's a little bit of interaction. I bring in all the enchantment removal that I usually bring in against the sideboard cards from the opponent, because they also hit Underworld Breach. So if the opponent is trying to go off, you can naturalize it in response, and then they ruin nothing. I will also bring in Mystical Dispute. And I will bring in Jace, probably, because sometimes both players are are building up, looking for their combo and maybe interacting a little bit. And then if you play Planeswalker, there's no answer for him, so he's giving you a little bit of card advantage. And also, of course, he's another win condition.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to actually be fast in this matchup in the mirror, or you want to actually take it a little bit easier and gather your resources? How do you set up your game in the mirror?
I still want to be fast, definitely. You want to kind of be very fast, but have the minimal amount of interaction that you need. So, like one naturalized effect is usually enough to buy you a turn or two. So you still want to be fast. You can't keep a hand that has like 2 hate pieces and nothing else going on. So
that's
it's still
important.
kind of a race, but you want to have interaction because it's usually either who's starting or who's playing the Arboreal Grazer first is going off. So you need that little bit of interaction.
All right. So you mentioned something that is pretty important, actually. The opening hand in the game's post sideboard. Okay, you could have a couple of hate cards, but you need still to have some pieces of the combo, some key pieces. Hate alone is not enough.
Yeah, because the deck, as I mentioned earlier, it plays quite a bit of card selection. So if you destroy the Underworld Breach in response of going off, they already got a little bit of value out of it because they play it, they keep priority, they play Paw Over the Pages or whatever. So it's very easy to rebuild fast. So yeah.
That's one of the strengths of the deck, definitely.
Yeah, that's one of the strengths.
Yeah. All right. Worst matchup. I mean, you're a fast deck, but there are other decks that could be faster than you. So, Mono Red Aggro, for instance. I understand it's not an easy one.
Well, it's not like super bad, but I'd say it's a little bit favored against us. Maybe 45 to 55.
Okay.
But also depends like who starts. If I am on the play, I have Grazer, then it's usually a good matchup. So it's close, but it's one of the closer matchups in the meta game.
How do you approach it?
Well, I try to go for the kill as fast as possible, of course. And I really like Grazer and Fey of Wishes or Sato Wayfinder as a way to prevent damage. And yeah, there's not much else to say. You just want to be faster because you do not have a lot of interaction. Of course, you also have the Fey of Wishes into anger. That's often good. But they also play burn spells, so you really don't want to spend too much time handling their threats. You just want to kill them fast.
All right, you mentioned creatures before. So is it something you want to have in your starting hand, like mandatory?
It's not mandatory, but they are very helpful. If you have the turn 4 kill, you have Lotus Field, Stage, and Paw Over the Pages or whatever, you can keep that hand. Turn 4 is still very fast. They don't always kill you on turn 4. But creatures definitely help.
All right, so you have a plan in there. You can be fast enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I even can get the Sanguine Sacrament from my sideboard. It's there specifically for that matchup.
Yeah.
Because in my local meta game, there's quite a bit of aggro. So sometimes you just have a lot of mana and the Fey, and Underworld Breach doesn't do anything because you don't have Paw Over the Pages. So you can just go get Sanguine Sacrament, get a bunch of life, and then go from there. Sometimes it happens that they are just too fast and you just have one Lotus Field and you don't have time to make a copy of it with Thespian Stage. So there's actually a way to win with that. You need Tome Scour out of the sideboard and Underworld Breach and Hidden Strings, because that will give you exact enough fuel in the graveyard and mana to recast the Tome Scour over and over again. But to start a combo, you need a bunch of Hidden Strings, because with only one Lotus Field and one random land, they will generate just 2 mana, so they kind of act like a Dark Ritual. So several Hidden Strings can produce enough mana to play the Fey and then get the Tome Scour and then start going off. So you don't need 2 Lotus Fields, it just makes it much, much easier. And also, sometimes if there's no other way, you can get Ugin and kill everything, and Ugin usually wins games alone.
Yeah, if you're post sideboard and you have Ugin on the battlefield, you're like definitely safer.
Yeah.
So this loop that you described with Hidden Strings and looking for Tome Scour, how much mana do you actually need to do this? And how many, Hidden Strings, you need 1 copy or need more copies?
Well, you have Lotus Field and let's say a forest, so that's 4 mana. Then you string once, that's 2 mana, so you are on 6, which allows you to play Fey of Wishes to get Tomb Scourer. And so you have 2 mana left, you will need another Hidden Strings or maybe a Vizier of Tumbling Sands. And then you would need 2 for the Underworld Breach, 2 for the Hidden Strings to recast them, and then you can start Tomb Scouring off. So really after Fey of Wishes, after you got the Tomb Scourer, you need 4 mana to go off.
Okay. And also the cards in the graveyard to be sure that you actually...
Yeah.
And that is Tomb Scourer that actually refills your graveyard in the end.
Usually you will have enough cards in the graveyard to at least recast Hidden Strings once, because you played the Lotus Field, so that's 2 lands in the graveyard. So you need just any other card, and then you can recast Hidden Strings once, and then you have enough mana to Tomb Scourer yourself, and then you go off.
All right. So even in desperate situations, if you have the right cards, because you need some of the cards, of course, you can try to pull it off even with 1 Lotus Field on the battlefield.
Yes, definitely.
All right. I think we covered everything we wanted to cover. So thank you very much, Julian, for joining me here.
Absolutely.
Nice to have you here after quite some time, as we said at the beginning. And hopefully we can make more videos together soon.
Yeah, of course. As soon as there's another broken deck emerging, I'm here again.
If there is a broken deck, you're in, just playing it.
Like Hogak, like Lotus Field, I like the broken decks.
All right, so that's the stuff you want to go for. Shall the opportunity arise, we're definitely going to record something again.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much again. And a big thank you to all of you for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed. If you did, please subscribe to the channel and share this video, Twitter, Facebook, any other platform of your choice. It will help us to keep on doing what we do. All right, everybody. Have a great time. Cast your favorite spells. And for now, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.